Good afternoon. I have a clip of Tucker Carlson coming up where he is talking about immigration and voting. And without getting into it, because he's going to explain his position in detail, I would just like to address that when he speaks of the democracy that we're in and how it is one person equals one vote, those are his words. That is not true. I already made a video about this with that clip in there, but I was focused exclusively on the Electoral College and how skewed that is and how it definitely does not equal one person means one vote. The presidential election compared to any other election that I am aware of is definitely skewed in terms of people in certain parts of the country having a considerable more amount of voting power than people in other parts of the country, and I will get to that. But in my first video, that's all I focused on was the Electoral College and how that skews the numbers of how much power you have in terms of what your vote counts for when you cast a vote in your state. The thing is, Tucker Carlson does not mention which voting process that he speaks of. I'm assuming that it's greatly the national legislation and the legislative and the executive branch. But in terms of our democracy, it is in fact not a true democracy. In a true democracy, whatever they had under consideration, and just to make it current, let's say it's Biden's proposal for infrastructure. Let's say the legislation, the House and the Senate vote on it or draft their own proposals or however they wanted to do it. Then it would go to the people, and everybody in the country, that is, everybody who was eligible and who was willing, would vote on it. That would be a true democracy, where everything that's going on in Washington, it doesn't end there. And by end there, I mean, I know after it goes through the process, it then comes back to affect us, good or bad. What I mean is, we would participate by voting on everything if it were a true democracy. And I am not advocating that that is a good idea, that's what we should do. I don't think that at all. What I do think is that democracy means by the people. What we have is a representational, constitutional republic that is formed largely through the democratic process, but it is by no means even close to being a true democracy. Even though we call ourselves that, and even though many people just don't know the difference, unfortunately, but the fact is, democracy is just shorthand for this thing that we are that would take 4 or 5 words to describe us adequately, and nobody wants to have to go through that every time they talk about what we are as a nation. We are a democracy, yes, to the extent that we use the democratic process to get where we are. We are a republic, yes. We are a representative, constitutional, you can keep adding words for as long as you need to describe it to your satisfaction, but we are not any one thing. So we're not a democracy. One person does not equal one vote, except in voting for your representative, and that representative can be anywhere from a handful of people in local government whom they are representing to a much larger number of people in county and larger yet in state, and hundreds of thousands of people in the legislative branch, and of course millions of people when you're talking about the executive branch. It is not a democracy. We do not vote on everything. We vote on representatives who vote on the things that, for better or worse, become the laws and the rules and regulations that we all have to follow. So right there, Tucker has it wrong. It is not one person equals one vote. Depending on where you're at, well, basically, local governments, it's going to be different across the country. You've got thousands that we are talking about. Each one's going to be different. Each one's going to have a different population. None of them are, some of them may be similar, none of them are going to be the same. So, right there, throw it out the window. It does not it does not mean one person equals one vote. That is only insofar as one person equals one vote when voting for a representative who is then going to vote for you concerning whatever. So, no, it is not a democracy. It is not one person equals one vote. It's not even close to that. The thing that I was focusing on greatly in the video that I had to scrap when it occurred to me, when Tucker says one person equals one vote, he could be talking about any branch of government. He could be talking, well, not, of course, not the judicial, but he could be talking about either branch of government. He could be talking about any size of government, the federal, the state, the county, the city governments that we have. It's awful vague. But that doesn't matter given his audience and the point he's trying to make. He's just trying to fearmonger, and he does a good job of that if you're taken in by it. But let us watch the clip, and then I will point out the ways that he's wrong. In terms of the national elections, the legislative branch and the executive branch in Washington, and especially the executive branch, and when you look at the numbers, how your voting power, depending on what state you live in, is actually much greater than everybody else in the country, or around average, or less than everybody else in the country. And that's because of the Electoral College, and it's a very screwed up system, and he doesn't want to talk about that because that's very informative, that's the truth, and that is not what he's trying to communicate. So let's listen to him.
I'm laughing because this is one of about 10 stories that I know you've covered where the government shows preference to people who have shown absolute contempt for our customs, our laws, our system itself, and they're being treated better than American citizens. Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true. If this was happening in your house, if you were in 6th grade, for example, and without telling you, your parents adopted a bunch of new siblings and gave them brand new bikes and let them stay up later and help them with their homework and gave them twice the allowance that they gave you, you would say to your siblings, I think we're being replaced by kids that our parents love more. And it would be kind of hard to argue against you because look at the evidence. So this matters on a bunch of different levels, but on the most basic level, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. If you change the population, you dilute the political power of the people who live there. So every time they import a new voter, I become disenfranchised as a current voter. So I don't understand why we don't understand this. I mean, everyone wants to make a racial issue out of it. Ooh, the white replacement theory. No. This is a voting rights question. I have less political power because they're importing a brand new electorate. Why should I sit back and take that? The power that I have as an American guaranteed at birth is one man, one vote, and they're diluting it. No, they're not allowed to do that. Why are we putting up with this?
Okay, without getting into the fact that anywhere you live, the amount of people who are being represented in Washington is going to be a different number than everywhere else in the country, and I'm talking states here. But that's the gist of it. It is not one person, one vote. The closest we come to that is in the Senate, where you've got an equal number of senators for every state. There's only 100 of them, and each state has equal representation. Given that every state is differently populated, that means the number of people in any given state has different representation in terms of their voting power in the Senate than every other state. But that, just in and of itself, complicates matters, and that's not where I want to go with this. I do think the founders were very wise to split it up that way. Give the Senate, and thus the states represented, equal voting power across the board. So every state in the Senate is equally represented. And then in the House of Representatives, it's supposed to be proportional, so all of the populations in all of those states are then equally represented. That's not how it's turned out over the years, and without even focusing on the House of Representatives, but it's there in the numbers when we talk about the Electoral College, per the Constitution. And just to harken back to Tucker, he said, it's a voting rights question. In a democracy, one person equals one vote. I want you to keep that in mind because that's not even close to where we're at. It wasn't close to where we're at starting at the beginning, given that, okay, the House of Representatives, every single state is going to have a different number of representatives, and those representatives are all going to have a varying number of constituents, because you can't, unless it's a one-on-one value, one representative for every person in the state, there's always going to, you're either going to be rounding up or rounding down. It's never going to be exact. And of course, in the Senate, the states are represented equally, but the populations are all over the place. As I said, I don't have a problem with that. I think it was a good idea. I think it was a good way to split it up. Let the House of Representatives represent the people and let the Senate represent the states. I think that was very wise, the way they did that. But the thing is, it used to be, and this is per Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, the number of representatives shall not exceed one for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least one representative. So you can either take that, I'm assuming, I mean, it says shall not exceed one for every 30,000. So if you have 30,000 people, that means you have one representative. If you have 59,999, you still have one representative, because if you had two, that would be more than one for every 30,000. So given the number of reps shall not exceed one for every 30,000, I'm assuming that means up to 60,000, you have one representative. As soon as you hit 60,000, you have two. As soon as you hit 90, you have three, so on and so forth. But that is not important. The thing is, there was a reapportionment act instituted in 1929, and what that did was limit the number of representatives to 435. So with the 435 and the 100 senators, which is 535, and then the three representatives, senators and representatives, senators and representative from D.C., that makes 538. If you had one representative per every 30,000 people, we now have a country with around 330 million people in it. You would have 11,000 representatives. Consider that. We have capped it at 435. If we had not capped it, we would have 11,000, which means we would have 11,000 plus electors representing the country instead of 538. How that breaks down then is you've got you've got 330 million people, you've got 538 electoral votes, which means on average you have 613,383 people represented by each elector. So using that as a baseline, Wyoming, which has 563,626 people and 3 representatives, 2 House and 1 Senator, if you divide that 563,626 by 3, you get 187,875 people being represented by each elector. So if you divide the baseline, the average number of people in the country being represented by each elector, you've got 613,383 divided by 187,875, which means Wyoming has 3.26 times the voting power of the average American. Now, when you look at California, which has 39 million people, 512,223, and you divide that by their 55 electors, you get 718,404. So given that, if you divide that number by per capita has 3.82 times the voting power of every resident of California. If you live in Wyoming, you have almost 4 times the voting power as a resident of California. And the numbers are all across the board, but Wyoming, Rhode Island, Wyoming, Rhode Island, and Montana are the three with the most voting power. Wyoming has 3.26 more than the national average. Rhode Island has 2.33 more than the national average, and Montana has 1.86 more than the national average. I would posit to Tucker Carlson and everybody who's freaking out over that little rant that he had, I would posit that they would be wiser to stop freaking out about immigrants who actually cannot even vote until they become citizens, which means they have to take a test and pass that I would be willing to bet most Americans, including the people on Fox News, could not pass. So instead of worrying about the immigrants diluting your vote, stop worrying about the immigrants. They're not diluting your vote. Unless they're all going to Wyoming and Rhode Island and Montana, they are not diluting your vote. If you really want your vote to count for more, move to Wyoming. If you don't like the idea of Wyoming, move to Rhode Island. If you don't want to live on the East Coast, move to Montana. The thing is, Americans have more voting power than other Americans do, and that is where the real problem lies. And it was bad enough just with the Electoral College. That always meant some were going to have a more powerful vote than others. With the Reapportionment Act of 1929, which capped the House at 435 representatives, when, if we had stuck with the original premise, one representative for every 30,000 people, we would have 11,000 representatives now. Because of that Reapportionment Act, that unfairly gives some states a huge advantage over other states in terms of voting power. So Tucker was completely wrong. He knows he's wrong. This information is not something he is not aware of. He is aware of this. He is just gaslighting you. And question yourself, why is this man going to such extremes to gaslight me? What is he getting out of it? Thank you for watching.